Justin Miller pushed open the heavy door to his mother's hospital room, the scent of antiseptic and despair hitting him like a wall. He could never have prepared himself for the tableau that awaited him. A scene so jarring, so utterly wrong, it would forever be etched into the darkest corners of his memory. He was never meant to witness this. Michelle had been in Columbia Presbyterian for 3 days, the fluorescent lights casting a sickly pallor on her already weakened face. Pneumonia, the doctor had diagnosed, a serious condition, certainly, but with diligent care, entirely manageable. Justin had visited her that morning, his hand dwarfed by hers as he held it, promising to return as soon as his meetings concluded. Audrey, his fiancée, had graciously volunteered to keep her company while he attended to his demanding schedule. "Go handle your business, darling," Audrey had said, her smile radiating warmth and reassurance. "I'll take care of her, you know I will." He had trusted her implicitly. So, when Justin found himself miraculously free from his obligations earlier than expected, he seized the opportunity to surprise them both, his heart brimming with gratitude as he purchased a vibrant bouquet of Michelle's favorite lilies. Walking through the sterile halls of the ICU, the afternoon was deceptively serene. Sunlight streamed through the expansive windows, painting the polished floors and sterile surfaces in hues of gold. He offered a polite smile to a passing nurse, unconsciously clutching the bouquet tighter, his footsteps quickening as he approached room 412. Then he heard it. A muffled sound, akin to a struggle, followed by the frantic, insistent beeping of a heart monitor, each pulse a desperate plea. His stomach lurched violently. An icy dread seized him, constricting his chest, stealing his breath. Driven by an instinct he didn't know he possessed, Justin's hand slammed against the door, pushing it open with unexpected force. And in that instant, time shattered into a million fragmented pieces. Audrey stood poised over his mother's bed, her posture rigid, unnatural. Both hands were clamped firmly around a plump, white pillow, pressing it down with brutal force over Michelle's face. His mother's frail hands, adorned with age spots and delicate veins, clawed weakly at Audrey's wrists, a desperate, silent battle being waged. Her body twisted and writhed beneath the crisp hospital sheets, a frantic struggle for air that was being denied to her. And Audrey's face, God, her face was a grotesque mask, twisted into a horrifying parody of the woman he thought he knew. Rage, yes, but also desperation, and something else, something far more disturbing. A cold, calculated resolve. The vibrant lilies slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, scattering across the floor in a silent, colorful protest. What are you doing?" The question ripped from his throat, a raw, guttural sound that shattered the afternoon's tranquility like a gunshot. Audrey's head snapped up, her eyes wide and feral, locking onto his with a chilling intensity. The pillow fell, landing with a soft, innocuous thud on the floor. Michelle's chest heaved spasmodically as she gasped for breath, raw, desperate, broken sounds that would forever echo in Justin's nightmares. For one impossible, frozen second, Justin was paralyzed, his mind unable to process the horror unfolding before him. He couldn't think, couldn't reconcile the beautiful, loving woman he had planned to marry with the monstrous figure standing over his mother's dying body. This was Audrey, the woman who laughed at his sometimes lame jokes, who kissed him goodnight with a tenderness that melted his heart, who was supposed to walk down the aisle toward him in 3 short months, radiant in white. But the woman staring back at him now, eyes wide with panic, hands shaking uncontrollably, chest heaving with exertion, was a stranger, an alien being inhabiting the shell of the woman he loved. And in that horrifying, defining moment, Justin realized something profound, something that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. He had no earthly idea who he had been sleeping beside all these months. But before we delve further into this nightmare, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and let me know where in the world you're watching from. Because sometimes, just sometimes, God grants us a glimpse of the truth just in the nick of time, before it's irrevocably, devastatingly too late. Justin's hands were still trembling violently when he lunged forward, propelled by pure, unadulterated instinct. He didn't think, didn't process the implications of what he was doing. His body simply moved, crossing the room in 2 swift strides, shoving Audrey back with a force that sent her stumbling against the wall. He placed himself between her and his mother like an unyielding barrier, a human shield she'd have to physically destroy to finish the horrific act she'd started. Michelle's breaths came in ragged, agonizing gasps, her chest rising and falling at an alarming rate, each inhalation shallow and insufficient. Justin's hands, surprisingly gentle, framed her face, tilting it towards him with infinite care. Mom, look at me. Breathe, Mom. Just breathe." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and clouded with confusion and terror. She searched his face as if she wasn't entirely sure he was real, as if he were a figment of her oxygen-starved imagination. Her lips trembled, contorting in a futile attempt to form words, but nothing came out except those broken, desperate sounds of a creature fighting for its very survival. The heart monitor continued its frantic, unwavering scream. "It's okay," Justin whispered, his voice cracking with emotion as he smoothed her thinning silver hair back from her damp forehead. "I'm here, Mom. You're safe now. I'm here." Audrey stood frozen against the wall, her chest heaving as if she had just run a marathon. Her hands still curled into the shape of holding something she had abruptly dropped. She stared at them, at Justin, cradling his mother in his arms, at Michelle's trembling fingers weakly clutching at his sleeve. And for a fleeting moment, she looked almost surprised, as if she hadn't anticipated him walking through that door at that precise moment, as if she had mistakenly believed she had more time to complete her heinous task. Justin refused to look at her. He couldn't. If he did, he didn't know what he was capable of. Michelle's breathing started to slow, becoming marginally less labored. Her grip on his arm tightened ever so slightly, and when her eyes finally focused on his face, really focused, a single tear escaped and traced a path down her pale, wrinkled cheek. "Justin," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "I've got you, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've got you." Just then, the door burst open, hinges protesting. 2 nurses rushed into the room, their eyes instantly sweeping the scene, taking in the chaotic tableau. The screaming monitor, Michelle gasping for air, Justin hovering protectively over her, Audrey backed into a corner, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. One nurse moved immediately to Michelle's side, expertly checking her vitals, adjusting her oxygen mask with practiced efficiency. The other glanced sharply between Justin and Audrey, her expression hardening with suspicion. "What happened here?" she demanded, her voice tight with controlled urgency. Justin's jaw clenched. He turned slowly, deliberately, and for the first time since the pillow had fallen to the floor, he truly looked at Audrey. Really looked at her. She was pale, almost translucent, and shaking from head to toe. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was disheveled, strands clinging to her damp forehead, and her designer blouse was wrinkled and askew, as if she'd been in a violent struggle. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, that confirmed the horrifying truth he had witnessed. They weren't filled with remorse, nor were they filled with horror at what she had almost done. They were filled with raw, unadulterated fear. Not fear for Michelle, but fear for herself, for the consequences she now faced. "She tried to kill her," Justin said, his voice low and steady, devoid of emotion. "I walked in and she was holding a pillow over my mother's face, trying to smother her." The nurse's eyes widened in disbelief. The second nurse immediately stepped towards the door, speaking in hushed tones into a radio clipped to her scrubs. "Security needed in ICU, room 412. Code red." Audrey's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, her eyes darting frantically around the room. No, that's not. Justin, you don't understand. I can explain. I saw you, Audrey." Her voice pitched higher, becoming increasingly frantic. "I was trying to help her sit up. She was coughing, choking. I didn't know what to do. You were smothering her." "No, I swear, Justin, I saw." His voice didn't rise, he didn't shout, but the words landed in the room like heavy stones, solid, unmovable, damning. Audrey's face crumpled. She pressed her back harder against the wall as if trying to merge with it, her hands coming up as if she wanted to reach for him, to beg for forgiveness, but didn't dare. Justin, please just listen to me. She was going to ruin everything. She stopped abruptly, her eyes wide with realization. The room went silent. Even the heart monitor seemed to quiet, its frantic beeping slowing to a steadier, less urgent rhythm as Michelle's oxygen levels began to stabilize. Justin stared at her, his gaze unwavering. What did you just say? Audrey's eyes darted from the nurses to the door, back to Justin. Her pupils dilated with fear. Her lips trembled uncontrollably. I didn't mean, what did you just say? She shook her head, pressing her lips together in a desperate attempt to retract the words, but they had already escaped, and they hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud, visible, undeniable, poisonous. She was going to ruin everything. 2 security guards, burly men with stern expressions, appeared in the doorway, their imposing presence filling the small room. One of them stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his belt, near his holstered weapon. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. Audrey's eyes snapped to Justin, wide and pleading. Justin, don't do this to me. We can talk about this. Just you and me. Please. He didn't answer, didn't acknowledge her presence. One of the guards moved closer, his expression unreadable. Ma'am, now. I love you, Justin. Audrey's voice broke, raw and desperate. I did this because I love you. Don't you see that? Justin turned away from her, unable to bear the sight of her desperation any longer. He sat down slowly in the chair beside his mother's bed and took Michelle's hand in both of his touch surprisingly gentle. He didn't watch as the security guards led Audrey out of the room, didn't flinch when her voice rose in the corridor, pleading, sobbing, insisting that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. He just held his mother's hand and tried to breathe, tried to slow the frantic pounding of his heart. The room felt smaller now, suffocating. Michelle's breathing had steadied, but her hands still gripped Justin's with a surprising strength, as if she was afraid to let go, afraid he would disappear. Her eyes stayed fixed on his face, not saying anything, just watching him, studying him, making sure he was real, making sure he was staying. I'm not going anywhere, Mom, Justin said softly, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. A doctor rushed into the room, flanked by another nurse. She moved quickly to Michelle's bedside, checking the monitors, examining her throat, her pulse, her eyes with clinical precision. Justin stood, but didn't step away from the bed. He stayed close enough that his mother could still reach for him if she needed to. Mrs. Miller, can you hear me? The doctor asked gently, her voice soothing. Michelle nodded, though the movement was weak and barely perceptible. Can you tell me what happened? Michelle's mouth opened, and she winced. Her voice came out thin and rasping, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. She was. Don't, Justin said, his hand finding hers again, his touch light but firm. Don't push yourself, Mom. Just rest. The doctor's eyes shifted to Justin, her gaze questioning. She didn't need to ask. The nurses had already filled her in on the horrifying details. Down the corridor, Audrey's voice carried, sharp and frantic, echoing off the sterile walls. You're making a mistake. He doesn't understand. She's been poisoning him against me for months. Justin closed his eyes, unable to shut out the sound of her increasingly desperate cries. The doctor finished her examination and stepped back, her expression carefully neutral, betraying nothing of her thoughts. She's going to be okay physically, but she'll need to stay another night for observation. We'll keep her on oxygen and monitor her vitals closely. Justin nodded, unable to find the words to express his gratitude. Mr. Miller, the doctor said quietly, glancing towards the door where Audrey's voice had finally faded into a series of unintelligible sobs. The police are going to want to speak with you and with your mother when she's ready. I know. The doctor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder for just a moment, a silent gesture of sympathy and support. And then she left, leaving Justin alone with his mother, and the shattered remnants of his life. The room settled into a strange, heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen and the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Justin sank back into the chair, his elbows resting on his knees, his head buried in his hands. His mind kept replaying the scene over and over again, like a broken record. The door opening, the pillow, his mother's hands clawing desperately for air, Audrey's face twisted into something unrecognizable, something monstrous. How long had she been standing there, poised to commit this unspeakable act? How close had Michelle come to death? 5 more minutes, maybe less. If he hadn't finished his meeting early, if he hadn't decided to stop for flowers, if he hadn't felt that strange, inexplicable pull in his chest telling him something was terribly wrong, his mother would be dead, and he would have been none the wiser. Justin. Michelle's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the noise in his head like a sharp blade, slicing through the fog of disbelief and horror. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with unshed tears. Her eyes were glassy with tears as well, but there was something else there, too. Something that looked a lot like guilt. "I'm sorry, Justin," she said, her voice weak and tremulous. Justin's face crumpled, and he leaned forward, taking both of her hands in his grip surprisingly firm. "Mom, no, don't say that. This is not your fault. I should have said something sooner." Her words came slowly, each one an effort, each syllable laced with pain. "I knew something wasn't right. The way she looked at you sometimes, the way she smiled when I wasn't looking. I felt it, Justin, but I didn't want to interfere. I didn't want you to think I was being controlling or jealous." "Stop, Mom." Justin's voice broke, thick with emotion. "This is not your fault. Do you hear me? None of this is your fault. You couldn't have known what she was capable of." A tear slipped down Michelle's cheek, tracing a path through the wrinkles etched by time and worry. "I almost died because I didn't want to hurt your feelings. How ridiculous is that?" Justin's chest tightened, and he struggled to breathe. He pressed his forehead gently against her hands, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. "You tried to tell me, Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse with regret. "You did try, and I didn't listen. I was too blind, too caught up in my own desires to see the truth." They stayed like that for a long time, mother and son, holding on to each other for dear life in a sterile hospital room that still smelled faintly of fear and scattered lilies. Outside the window, the sun was slowly setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the city. The city lights were beginning to flicker on one by one, like distant stars waking up in the gathering darkness. And somewhere down the hall, behind locked doors and under the watchful eyes of security guards, the woman Justin had planned to marry was telling anyone who would listen that she'd done it all for love. The police came an hour later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, stood at the foot of Michelle's bed, notepads in hand, voices gentle but direct, respectful of her fragile state. They asked Justin to walk them through it, to recount every detail of that horrific afternoon. What time he arrived, what he saw, what Audrey said, what her demeanor was. Justin answered mechanically, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, as if he were reciting a script he had memorized. But when they asked to speak with Michelle, something inside him snapped to attention, a protective instinct kicking in. "She needs to rest," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "She's been through a lot. Can't this wait?" "We understand, Mr. Miller," the female officer said, her voice patient and understanding. "But we need her statement while the details are fresh in her mind. It's important for the investigation." Michelle squeezed Justin's hand, offering him a weak but reassuring smile. "It's okay, honey. I'll tell them what I remember." She told them what she remembered, her voice faltering slightly as she recounted the events of that afternoon. Audrey visiting, making small talk that felt strained and unnatural. And then, without warning, Audrey's face changing, hardening into something Michelle didn't recognize, something cold and calculating. She said. Michelle's voice wavered, and she closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. She said, "I was in the way." The officers exchanged a quick, meaningful glance. "In the way of what, Mrs. Miller?" the male officer asked gently. Michelle closed her eyes again, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her temple. Her future. When the police finally left, promising they'd be in touch, Justin sat in the dimness of the room, staring blankly at nothing, his mind numb with shock. Michelle had drifted into a restless sleep, her breathing soft but uneven. And for the first time since he'd walked through that door and witnessed the unthinkable, Justin allowed himself to feel it. All of it. The full, crushing weight of what had happened. The woman he loved, the woman he had promised to spend the rest of his life with, had tried to kill his mother. And the worst part, the part that made his stomach twist with a sickening mixture of guilt and self-loathing, was that he'd brought her into their lives. He'd ignored the small signs, dismissed his mother's gentle concerns, rushed into an engagement because he was tired of being alone, tired of the emptiness that had haunted him for so long. He thought of his father, a man he hadn't thought about in years. But now the memory came flooding back, sharp and unwelcome, as if summoned by the day's darkness. Justin was 7 years old when his dad walked out, leaving them without a backward glance. He could still remember the sound of the door slamming shut, the deafening silence that followed, his mother standing in the kitchen, staring at the counter, as if she was trying to figure out how to hold the entire world together with her bare hands. She never said a bad word about him, not once. She just kept going, kept fighting. She worked as a nurse during the day, her days long and demanding, and cleaned office buildings at night, her hands raw and chapped. Justin barely saw her some weeks, but every morning, without fail, there was breakfast on the table, a testament to her unwavering dedication. Every school event, every parent-teacher conference, she was there, exhausted but smiling, pretending she wasn't running on 2 hours of sleep and an endless supply of coffee. When he got into business school, she cried, not because she was sad, but because she was overwhelmed with pride. "You're going to be somebody, Justin," she told him, gripping his hands tightly in hers. "You're going to do things I never could." Justin built his first company in grad school, fueled by an insatiable drive to succeed and a burning desire to make his mother proud. By 32, he'd taken it public and the stock soared. By 38, he was a billionaire, his name synonymous with success and innovation. And the first thing he did, the very first thing, was buy his mother a house, a beautiful, sprawling ranch-style home with a meticulously manicured lawn and a rose garden that would rival Versailles. She stood in the driveway staring at it, her eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude, and burst into tears. "I don't deserve this, Justin," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, you do, Mom," Justin said, his voice thick with emotion. "You deserve everything. You've earned it 100 times over." But even then, even with all his success, even with all the material possessions he could shower upon her, he felt it. That weight, that quiet, constant reminder that he owed her more than money could ever repay. She gave him everything, sacrificing her own dreams and desires for his well-being. And he spent his whole life trying to be worthy of her love and her unwavering belief in him. Maybe that's why he didn't see Audrey clearly. Maybe that's why he ignored his mother's gentle concerns, dismissing them as overprotectiveness. Because deep down, some broken, insecure part of him believed he didn't deserve to be loved unconditionally, that he had to earn it to prove his worthiness. And Audrey had made it feel so easy, so effortless. Until today, when easy became deadly, when the illusion shattered and the monster beneath the surface revealed its true, horrifying face. Justin met Audrey on a night when he wasn't looking for anyone, when he had resigned himself to a life of solitude, focusing solely on his work and his accomplishments. It was a charity gala, one of those obligatory events he attended more out of a sense of duty than genuine interest. Black ties, champagne glasses, wealthy people writing checks to assuage their guilt and feel good about themselves for an evening. He'd been planning to stay for an hour, make a generous donation, and politely excuse himself, eager to return to the quiet solitude of his penthouse apartment. And then she laughed. It wasn't a forced, polite chuckle, the kind you hear at these events all night long. It was genuine, uninhibited, real. She was standing near the bar, engaged in a lively conversation with someone about the nonprofit's mission. And something the man said made her throw her head back and laugh, her eyes sparkling with amusement, as if she'd forgotten anyone was watching. Justin found himself inexplicably drawn to her, his feet moving of their own volition. "You actually care about this," he said, his voice slightly hoarse, when the man excused himself to grab another drink. Audrey turned, surprised by his sudden appearance, and then smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Why else would I be here? Most people come for the networking and the photo ops. And you?" He paused, his gaze lingering on her radiant face. "Honestly, guilt." She laughed again, that same infectious, genuine laugh that had captivated him from across the room. And just like that, they were talking not about business or money or who knew who, but about things that truly mattered, things that stirred their souls. She told him about her event planning work, not to impress him with her accomplishments, but because she genuinely loved it, loved creating memorable experiences for people. She spoke passionately about organizing a fundraiser for a children's hospital, describing how it made her cry when she saw the children's faces light up with joy. She didn't ask what he did until halfway through the conversation, and when he told her about his company and his success, she just nodded, seemingly unfazed. "That's nice, Justin," she said, her eyes searching his. "But what do you truly care about? What makes you tick?" No one had asked him that question in years. He'd become so consumed with his career and his public image that he'd forgotten what it felt like to connect with someone on a deeper level. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long, deep sleep. Dinners at quiet, intimate restaurants where they talked for hours, until the staff started stacking chairs and hinting that it was time to leave. Long walks through the city, where Audrey pointed out little details he'd stopped noticing, the beauty he'd grown blind to. A vibrant mural painted on a brick wall, a talented street musician serenading passers-by. The way the golden light of sunset transformed the mundane buildings into breathtaking works of art. She had this incredible energy about her, this uncanny ability to make ordinary moments feel significant, to infuse life with joy and wonder. Her apartment was modest but warm and inviting, filled with books and art, and the scent of freshly baked cookies. She insisted on splitting checks sometimes, laughing when he protested. "I'm not some damsel in distress, Justin. I can take care of myself, you know." He loved that about her, her independence, her spirit. 3 months into their whirlwind romance, he brought her home to meet Michelle, his heart filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. His mother was as kind and gracious as always, welcoming Audrey with open arms and a warm smile. She asked Audrey about her work, her family, her dreams, her aspirations. Audrey answered with just the right mix of confidence and humility, charming his mother with her wit and her genuine enthusiasm for life. And when Michelle hugged her goodbye, she whispered to Justin, "She's lovely, darling. You seem very happy." But there was something in her voice, something quiet and careful, a subtle reservation that Justin couldn't quite decipher. "What, Mom?" Justin asked later when they were alone in the car. "What did you really think? Be honest." Michelle hesitated, her gaze thoughtful. "Nothing, sweetheart. She seems very nice, very polished. I'm happy you're happy, Justin. That's all that matters." 5 months later, Justin proposed. They were watching the sunset from his penthouse terrace, the city sprawling beneath them like a glittering tapestry, and it just felt right. The culmination of everything he had been searching for. He got down on one knee, and Audrey's eyes filled with tears, reflecting the fiery hues of the setting sun. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, of course, Justin. 1,000 times yes." A week later, over coffee at a charming cafe in the West Village, Audrey brought up the subject of a prenuptial agreement. "I want you to know that I love you, Justin," she said, her hand covering his on the table, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I love you for who you are, not for what you have. I wouldn't want you to ever think that I was after your money." Justin shook his head, his heart swelling with tenderness. "I don't need that, Audrey. I trust you implicitly. I know you're not after my money." Something flickered across her face, a fleeting expression so fast he almost missed it. Disappointment, perhaps, or maybe frustration. But then she smiled, squeezing his hand reassuringly. "Okay, if you're sure," she said. He was sure, completely and utterly sure. He trusted Audrey with his life. Michelle, however, had lingering concerns, small ones gently voiced. "What's the rush, Justin?" she asked one evening, as they were sitting in her living room, sipping tea. "You've only known each other for a few months. Are you sure you're not moving too fast?" "Mom, I'm 45 years old," Justin said, exasperated. "I know what I want. I'm not a naive kid. Audrey is the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. I'm not saying she's not wonderful, darling," Michelle said softly, touching his cheek with a loving hand. "I'm just saying take your time. Don't let the excitement cloud your judgment." But Justin didn't want to take his time. He'd spent years building empires and accumulating wealth, only to come home to empty rooms and the echoing silence of his own loneliness. Audrey made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could have both. Success and someone to share it with, someone to fill the void in his heart. So, he ignored the way Audrey's smile sometimes tightened imperceptibly when Michelle offered wedding planning advice, offering suggestions that Audrey brushed aside with a dismissive wave of her hand. He ignored the way she called Michelle Mom, a little too quickly, a little too eagerly, as if trying to force a connection that wasn't quite there. He ignored the small moments when her mask slipped and something colder, something calculating, showed through. He ignored it all, blinded by his own desire for happiness, until 2 weeks ago, when Michelle collapsed at home, clutching her chest and gasping for air. "Pneumonia," the doctor said after rushing her to the hospital. She needed to be hospitalized and closely monitored. Audrey immediately volunteered to visit her every afternoon while Justin was at work, keeping her company and making sure she had everything she needed. "I'll keep her company, darling," Audrey had said, kissing him lightly on the cheek. "You focus on your meetings and your work. I've got her. Don't worry about a thing." Justin had been so grateful for her thoughtfulness, so touched by her apparent love and concern for his mother. He thought it meant she truly cared about Michelle, that she was genuinely invested in their well-being. He didn't realize she was buying time, waiting for her moment to strike, planning the unthinkable. Michelle's pneumonia didn't get better the way they expected. What started as a manageable infection quickly spiraled into complications. Her oxygen levels dropped precipitously, her fever spiked dangerously high, and the doctors, their faces etched with concern, moved her to the ICU and spoke in careful, measured tones about recovery taking longer than anticipated, about the possibility of long-term damage. Justin came every evening after work, exhausted but determined to be there for his mother. He sat beside her bed, holding her hand, talking about nothing important, just filling the silence so she wouldn't feel alone, so she would know that he was there, that he cared. Audrey came during the afternoons, or so she said. He had no reason to doubt her. 3 days before Justin walked through that door and witnessed the horrifying attempt on his mother's life, something happened that he wouldn't learn about until much later, something that set the wheels in motion for the tragedy that almost unfolded. Michelle was awake and relatively alert when Audrey arrived that afternoon. Her breathing was still labored, but her mind was clear, sharper than it had been in days. Audrey pulled a chair close to the bed, smiled warmly, and asked how she was feeling. "Tired," Michelle admitted, her voice weak and raspy. "But I'll be all right. I'm a fighter." "Of course you will," Audrey said, her voice overly sweet, almost cloying. "You're strong, Michelle. Stronger than you know." They made small talk for a few minutes, discussing the weather, the attentiveness of the nurses, Michelle's progress in physical therapy. And then Michelle said something that changed the atmosphere in the room, something that hung in the air like a gathering storm cloud. "I've been thinking, Audrey," Michelle said, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Maybe you and Justin should postpone the wedding, just until I'm well enough to really be present for it, to truly enjoy it. I wouldn't want to miss a single moment of your special day." Audrey's smile froze on her face, her eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. "Oh," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Well, If that's what you think is best. Michelle reached for her hand, her touch surprisingly firm. I just want to make sure you're both certain, darling. Marriage is a big commitment, it's everything. And sometimes when things move quickly, it's easy to miss things, to overlook potential problems. Audrey's fingers tightened around Michelle's hand, her nails digging into her skin. What kinds of things are you talking about, Michelle? Michelle's eyes were gentle but honest, her gaze unwavering. I've noticed how much pressure you both seem to be under lately. Justin works so much, and you're planning a wedding while dealing with all of this. I just worry that you're both running on fumes. We've talked about everything, Audrey said quietly, her voice laced with defensiveness. We're completely open with each other. I know you have, sweetheart. I'm not doubting that. I want you both to be absolutely certain that you're making the right decision. Michelle paused, choosing her words with painstaking care. Justin has a big heart, Audrey. He leads with it, always has. And that's a beautiful quality, but sometimes it makes him vulnerable, makes him susceptible to being taken advantage of. I just want to make sure he's seeing clearly that you both are. Audrey slowly pulled her hand back, her expression unreadable. You don't think I'm right for him, do you? That's what you're really saying. That's not what I said. Audrey, Michelle said softly, her eyes filled with compassion. I like you very much. I do. But I've also watched my son fall in love before, and this feels different, faster, almost desperate. And I can't shake the feeling that something's not quite right, that something's missing. Audrey stood abruptly, her purse clutched tightly in her hands, her knuckles white. I should go, she said, her voice strained and unnatural. Let you rest. Michelle nodded, her eyes sad but unwavering. I'm not trying to hurt you, Audrey. I'm trying to protect him. From me, from rushing into something that isn't ready, from making a mistake that he'll regret for the rest of his life. Audrey left without another word, her face a mask of suppressed anger and resentment. And Michelle lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake, if she had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. What Michelle didn't know, what no one knew, was that Audrey's seemingly perfect life was a carefully constructed facade, a house of cards built on lies and desperation. Her apartment was drowning in debt, the reality hidden behind a carefully curated image of success. Credit card statements hidden in drawers, collection notices stuffed in shoeboxes, eviction warnings taped to her door when no one was looking, quickly ripped down before anyone could see. Her event planning business, once thriving, had collapsed 6 months ago, a victim of the pandemic and a series of bad decisions. But she kept showing up in designer clothes and expensive makeup, smiling like everything was fine, pretending that she was still the successful, sought-after event planner she once was. Because if people knew she was broke, if they knew she was struggling, they'd stop taking her seriously, they'd stop hiring her, and her carefully crafted world would come crashing down around her. And if Justin knew, he'd see her differently. He'd realize that she wasn't the perfect woman he thought she was, that she was just a fraud, a con artist desperately clinging to the hope of a better life. And Michelle, with her gentle voice and her careful observations, was about to tell him to slow down, to wait, to reconsider their hasty engagement. If he listened to his mother, if he heeded her warning, Audrey would lose everything. The engagement, the security, the glamorous life she'd spent 8 months carefully constructing, the escape from the crushing weight of her debt. So, when Audrey visited the next day and Michelle mentioned wanting to talk to Justin about the wedding timeline, something inside Audrey snapped, a dam bursting, unleashing a torrent of rage and desperation. What are you going to tell him? Audrey asked, her voice tight and controlled, her eyes burning with a dangerous intensity. Michelle smiled softly, unaware of the darkness that had taken root in Audrey's heart. Just that maybe you both. The sterile scent of the room seemed to intensify, mirroring the unraveling of Justin's world. Audrey's revelation hung heavy in the air. Her face, once a canvas of practiced smiles, now crumbled like old parchment. Justin, please don't, she begged, her voice laced with desperation. Justin, please don't, he echoed in his mind, a hollow counterpoint to her plea. But the Justin she knew was gone, replaced by a man betrayed. The detective, a woman etched with the wisdom of countless cases, gray streaks painting a roadmap of experience through her dark hair. A simple wedding ring, a silent testament to her own understanding of commitment, subtly gestured toward a quieter corner of the room. Her gaze, steady and compassionate, offered a fleeting moment of solace amidst the storm. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice a calming balm. "Can you walk me through what you witnessed? Every detail, no matter how small, could be crucial." And so, Justin began to unravel the tapestry of that afternoon, each thread a painful reminder of his shattered reality. He recounted every detail with a chilling precision. The soft give of the pillow, his mother's frail hands reaching out in vain, the mask of serene indifference on Audrey's face as she pressed down. "And what did Miss Hill say when you confronted her?" The detective prompted, her pen poised above her notepad, ready to capture the subtle nuances of truth and deception. Justin hesitated, the words still echoing in the chambers of his heart, each syllable a shard of ice. "She said my mother was going to ruin everything." The detective's pen paused, hovering above the page. "Ruin what?" The question hung in the air, pregnant with unspoken implications. "I don't know." She didn't get to finish. But even as he spoke the words, a chilling mosaic began to assemble itself in his mind. Fragments of memory, moments he had dismissed as insignificant, suddenly took on a sinister hue. The fleeting flicker of unease that danced in Audrey's eyes whenever Michelle offered wedding advice, the almost indecent haste with which she had pushed for a fall wedding date, the prenup suggestion that felt more like a formality, a box to be checked off on a list of calculated acquisitions. The detective glanced toward the waiting room, where the weight of unspoken truths pressed down on the very walls. "We'd like to speak with Miss Hill now," she stated, her voice devoid of judgment. "You're welcome to stay, but you don't have to." Justin remained rooted to the spot, drawn by a morbid curiosity, a desperate yearning for answers. They ushered Audrey into a small, sterile consultation room, the kind designed for hushed conversations and uncomfortable truths. Justin stood just outside, a silent observer, watching through the narrow window in the door. He told himself he needed to hear this, needed to dissect every word, every inflection, until he understood the twisted logic that had driven her actions. But a desperate, foolish part of him clung to the hope that there was an explanation, a rationalization that would somehow make sense of the senseless. But deep down he knew that there would be no reason, no justification to condone the actions of Miss Audrey Hill. There wasn't. "Miss Hill," the detective began, her voice even, betraying none of the emotions churning beneath the surface. "Can you tell me what happened in Mrs. Miller's room this afternoon?" Audrey's lips trembled, a tremor that ran through her entire being. "It's not what it looked like," she stammered, her voice laced with a desperate plea for understanding. "What was it then?" The detective's question was a razor's edge, cutting through the layers of deceit. "She was trying to take him from me." Audrey's voice cracked, rising in pitch, the carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of her desperation. "She's been poisoning him against me for months, telling him we're moving too fast, that I'm not good enough, that he should wait." "So you tried to kill her?" the detective stated. "No, I just—" Audrey stopped, her chest heaving, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal searching for an escape route, an exit that didn't exist. "I needed her to stop." The detective leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Stop what?" "Talking, interfering, ruining everything I've worked for." There it was again, that chilling phrase, "worked for." The detective caught it, too. "What do you mean, worked for?" Audrey's face twisted, contorted by a mixture of anger and fear. She pressed her palms against her eyes, as if trying to physically push back the truth. And when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper, a confession dragged from the depths of her soul. "Do you know how hard it is to get close to someone like Justin? How many years I spent positioning myself in the right circles, going to the right events, making the right connections." Justin's stomach turned, a wave of nausea washing over him. Miss Hill was a hunter. She was going to tell him to leave me. Audrey's voice broke, the carefully constructed persona shattering into something raw and wild. I could see it in her eyes. Every time she looked at me, she was calculating, judging, deciding I wasn't enough. And if she told him to wait, to reconsider, he'd listen. He always listens to her. So, you tried to suffocate her. The detective's words were stark, devoid of emotion. Audrey's hands dropped, falling limply to her sides. Her eyes were red-rimmed, desperate, unrecognizable. I love him. I did this because I love him. That's not love, the detective said quietly, her voice a beacon of reason in the storm of madness. Outside the door, Justin couldn't breathe, his lungs constricting with the weight of the revelation. Years of careful planning, meticulous execution, all boiled down to this. Years positioning myself. Their first meeting, the carefully orchestrated encounter at the charity gala, her practiced laugh, the way she'd seemed so genuine, so effortlessly charming. It was all a calculated charade, a meticulously researched and flawlessly executed plan. She hadn't fallen for him. She'd hunted him, stalked him, targeted him with cold, calculated precision. The detective stood, the moment of truth arriving. Audrey Hill, you're under arrest for attempted murder. Audrey's head snapped up, her eyes widening in disbelief. No, you can't. Justin. Her voice rose to a piercing scream as the officers helped her to her feet. Justin, please don't let them do this. We can work through this. I love you. Justin turned away, his heart a shattered wasteland. He walked back toward his mother's room, Audrey's voice echoing behind him. A symphony of pleading, breaking, and promising things that had never been real. And when he finally sat down beside Michelle's bed again, when he took her hand in his and felt her fingers curl weakly around his, he let himself cry, a torrent of grief and betrayal. Not for Audrey, but for the man he'd been just hours ago, the one who thought he'd found love, who thought he understood what trust meant, who thought he was building a future on solid ground. That man was gone, lost in the wreckage of shattered illusions, and Justin didn't know who was left in his place. The sun had set, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fading orange. By the time the detective returned, the clock hands slowly ticking the sands of time, Justin was still sitting beside Michelle's bed, his hand clasped in hers, his gaze fixed on the gentle rise and fall of her chest. He hadn't moved in over an hour, hadn't checked his phone, hadn't spared a thought for work or meetings or the countless emails that were undoubtedly waiting for him. None of it mattered. The detective knocked softly on the door frame, her presence a gentle intrusion. Mr. Miller, can I have a moment? Justin nodded, slowly, carefully untangling his fingers from his mother's grasp. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. He stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him, shutting out the sterile light and the hushed whispers of the hospital. We searched Miss Hill's apartment, the detective said, her voice low and somber. With her consent, she added, a subtle nuance that didn't escape Justin's notice. And she's in significant financial trouble. Credit card debt over $180,000. Her event planning business filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago. There are eviction notices, collection letters, some dating back nearly a year. Justin stared at her, the words hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. The pieces were falling into place, painting a grim picture of desperation and deceit. We also found evidence that she researched you extensively before you met. Browser history, saved articles, social media deep dives, the charity gala where you two met. She knew you'd be there. She positioned herself specifically to cross paths with you. His chest felt hollow, an empty cavern where his heart used to be. I'm sorry, the detective said quietly, her eyes filled with a genuine empathy. I know this isn't easy to hear. Justin leaned back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the cold, sterile floor. She needed money. It appears so. And my mother. He swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. My mother was going to tell me to slow down, to wait, and if I listened, Miss Hill would lose access to you, to your resources. The words hung in the air between them, cold and clinical, stripped bare of all pretense. Justin closed his eyes, a wave of self-reproach washing over him. How could he have been so blind? How could he have allowed himself to be so easily manipulated? The detective didn't answer right away, allowing him to grapple with the weight of his realization. When she spoke, her voice was softer, tinged with a hint of understanding. People see what they want to see, Mr. Miller, especially when they're lonely. He looked up at her, and something in her expression told him she understood. That maybe she'd been there, too, once trusting the wrong person, missing the warning signs, blinded by her own desires. "She'll be arraigned tomorrow," the detective continued, her voice regaining its professional composure. "Attempted murder. Given the evidence and your witness testimony, bail will likely be denied. You'll need to come in and give a formal statement when you're ready." Justin nodded numbly, his mind reeling. The detective handed him her card, her name and number, a lifeline in the storm. "If you need anything, call me." She left him standing there in the hallway, alone with his grief and his shame, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the faint smell of antiseptic and cafeteria food drifting through the air. He went back inside, drawn by an invisible force. Michelle was awake now, her eyes tracking him as he crossed the room, her gaze filled with concern and unconditional love. She didn't say anything, just watched him sink into the chair, his shoulders sagging under the weight of everything he'd learned. "She was broke," Justin finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, the words heavy with disbelief. "The whole time, everything she showed me, the confidence, the independence, the woman who didn't need my money, it was all a lie." Michelle's hand found his, her touch a source of comfort and strength. "She targeted me, Mom, researched me, planned the whole thing. Our meeting wasn't fate. It was strategy." A tear slipped down his cheek, tracing a path through the stubble on his jaw. "And I brought her into our lives, into your life. I almost got you killed because I was too desperate to be loved, to see what was right in front of me." "Justin, no." His voice cracked, choked with emotion. "You tried to warn me. You told me to slow down, and I didn't listen. I was so sure I knew better. So sure you were just being overprotective." Michelle squeezed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Stop." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for forgiveness. "You loved with an open heart," she said, her voice raspy but firm. "That's not a flaw, sweetheart. That's who you are. Audrey's choices are hers. Her desperation, her lies, her violence. None of that is your fault. But I should have seen. You saw what she wanted you to see. That's what manipulators do. They study you. They learn what you need and become that person." Michelle's eyes filled with tears, reflecting the pain and betrayal that had permeated the room. "But you know what she didn't count on?" Justin shook his head, his gaze locked on his mother's. "That instinct that brought you back here today. That voice inside you that said something was wrong. You listened to that, and it saved my life." Justin pressed his forehead against their joined hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "I don't know how to trust anymore," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You will," Michelle said softly, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Not today, not tomorrow, but you will. Because love that's real doesn't need to be performed. It doesn't need to be earned. It just is." She paused, catching her breath. "Audrey taught you what love isn't. Now you'll recognize what love is." They sat together in the dim hospital room, the city lights twinkling through the window, a silent testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And for the first time since he'd walked through that door, Justin let himself feel it, the full weight of his emotions, the betrayal, the shame, the grief for something that had never really existed. And beneath it all, something else began to stir, a flicker of hope, a glimmer of light, relief, that he'd seen the truth before it was too late, that his mother was still here, that broken as he felt, he wasn't alone. For days passed before Michelle was moved out of the ICU, and in the background, time still marches forward. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Her lungs were clearing, her oxygen levels had stabilized, but there was something else they couldn't quite measure, a lingering weariness in her eyes that had nothing to do with pneumonia. Justin barely left her side, camping out beside her hospital bed and watching over her like a guardian angel. The first morning after the incident, his assistant called, frantic, her voice teetering on the edge of panic. The board was demanding answers. There were meetings scheduled, contracts waiting for his signature, investors who needed reassurance. The world of corporate empire, which had once been everything, was now fading. Justin sat in the sterile hospital cafeteria, his coffee untouched, his appetite vanished, and typed out an email he never thought he'd send. A message that would send shockwaves through his carefully constructed world. Family emergency. I'm taking leave. Trust the team I've built. I'll return when I'm ready. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, severing the ties that had bound him for so long. Within minutes, his phone lit up, vibrating incessantly with calls, texts, panicked messages from executives who'd never seen him step away, who couldn't fathom a world without his constant presence. Justin silenced his phone and slipped it into his pocket, shutting out the cacophony of the outside world. For the first time in 15 years, work would have to wait. Michelle was awake when he came back to her room, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. She watched him settle into the chair, noticed the way his shoulders seemed lighter somehow, as if he'd shed a great burden. "You didn't?" she said softly, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "I did, Mom. They'll survive without me for a few weeks." "You almost didn't." His voice was quiet, but steady, filled with a newfound resolve. "I've spent my whole life building things, Mom, empires, companies, wealth, and I almost lost the only thing that actually matters." Michelle's eyes filled with tears, reflecting the depth of his transformation. Over the next few days, they fell into a comfortable rhythm, a simple routine that felt like a balm to their wounded souls. Justin brought her favorite soup from the little diner 3 blocks from her house, the one she used to take him to when he was a kid, the one that held 1,000 memories within its savory broth. He read to her from the mystery novel she loved, doing terrible voices for the characters until she laughed, which made her cough, which made them both laugh harder, tears streaming down their faces. The nurses started commenting on it, how rare it was to see someone so present, so undistracted. "Most people can't put their phones down for 5 minutes, one nurse said, smiling. "Your son hasn't looked at us once." Michelle just squeezed Justin's hand, her heart overflowing with love and pride. The legal updates came in pieces, filtered through lawyers and whispered conversations. Audrey had been formally charged with attempted murder. Bail was denied as expected. Her lawyer had tried reaching out to Justin multiple times, looking for some kind of settlement, some way to make this go away quietly, to minimize the damage. Justin's response was brief, unwavering, and absolute. No contact, ever. A trial date was set for 6 months out, a date that loomed on the horizon like a dark cloud. "How do you feel about that?" Michelle asked one afternoon, her voice still raspy, but gradually growing stronger. Justin thought about it, turning the question over in his mind, searching for the right words to express the complex emotions churning within him. "I don't feel anything," he finally said, his voice devoid of anger or animosity. Not anger, not satisfaction, just empty where she used to be. "That's normal," Michelle said gently, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're grieving someone who never really existed. Is that what this is?" he asked, seeking confirmation, seeking clarity. She nodded, her gaze unwavering. "You loved the person she pretended to be. That person is gone. Even if she never was real, your feelings were. And those feelings deserve to be mourned." Justin absorbed that, turning it over in his mind, letting the truth of her words sink deep into his soul. "I keep thinking about what she said," he admitted, his voice barely audible, "that she spent years positioning herself, that our meeting was calculated. It makes me feel like such an idiot." "You're not an idiot," Michelle said firmly, her voice laced with conviction. "You're human." She shifted in her bed, wincing slightly. "She saw your loneliness, Justin. She studied you, learned what you needed, and became that person. That's not a reflection of your judgment. That's a reflection of her desperation. You almost died because of my blind spot." "No," Michelle's voice was firm, allowing no room for argument. I almost died because she made a choice, a terrible, unforgivable choice. But you saved me. You listened to that voice inside you that said something was wrong. And you came back. That's what matters. Justin wanted to believe her. He was desperately trying to forgive himself, to release the burden of guilt that weighed so heavily on his shoulders. That evening, after Michelle had fallen asleep, Justin found himself talking to the hospital chaplain. A quiet man with kind eyes who'd stopped by Michelle's room earlier in the week, offering a silent presence and a comforting smile. I don't know how to trust anymore, Justin confessed, his voice filled with anguish. How do I move forward when I can't tell what's real? The chaplain was quiet for a moment, his gaze filled with compassion. You start small, he said softly. You start with the people who've proven themselves. Your mother, for instance. She's been steady your whole life, hasn't she? Justin nodded, a wave of gratitude washing over him. Build from there. Let trust be earned slowly over time, through consistency, not through grand gestures or perfect words, but through showing up day after day, the way you're showing up for her now. Something in Justin's chest loosened slightly, a knot of anxiety unraveling just a bit. Before he left, the chaplain added, sometimes God lets us see the truth just in time, not to punish us, but to protect us. Maybe that instinct that brought you back here wasn't yours alone. Justin sat with that long after the chaplain had gone, his mind grappling with the concept of divine intervention, the possibility that something greater than himself had played a role in saving his mother's life. By the end of the week, Michelle was discharged, the long-awaited moment finally arriving. Justin moved her into his penthouse temporarily, he said, offering a weak smile, though they both knew he had no intention of letting her go back to her place alone anytime soon. He hired a nurse to help with her care, but he did most of it himself, wanting to be actively involved in her recovery, to make up for the time he'd lost, the moments he'd missed. Morning coffee together, filled with quiet conversations and gentle laughter. Afternoon walks around the spacious apartment, taking in the breathtaking views of the city. Evening conversations that stretched late into the night, delving into topics they'd never had time to explore before. His executives sent updates, keeping him informed of the company's progress, but he no longer felt the need to be constantly involved. The company was running smoothly without him, better even, now that they had the freedom to step into leadership roles to take ownership of their work. Michelle watched him one morning, sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating his face, and smiled. You're different. How? He asked, his brow furrowed with curiosity. Quieter, more settled. She paused, her eyes filled with love. More like the boy I raised, before the empire, before the pressure, just you. Justin looked out at the city below, at the sprawling landscape of concrete and steel, the place he'd conquered, the world he'd built. It didn't feel as important as it used to. What felt important was this, his mother's hand in his, her breathing steady, her smile real. This was enough. 6 weeks later, Michelle stood in Justin's modern kitchen, humming quietly to herself. It was a simple thing. Eggs, toast, coffee. But watching her move through the space, her body gradually regaining its strength, her spirit radiating joy, felt like a miracle. Justin didn't take a single moment for granted, cherishing every second he had with her. You're staring? Michelle said without turning around, her voice filled with amusement. Justin smiled. Can't help it. She brought 2 plates to the table and sat across from him, the morning light pouring through the windows, turning everything soft and golden. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, talking about nothing important, the weather, a book Michelle was reading, a documentary Justin wanted to watch with her, the mundane details of everyday life. These were the moments he'd missed while building his empire, the moments that truly mattered, the moments that nourished the soul. The call came while they were finishing their coffee, shattering the peace and tranquility of the morning. Audrey had taken a plea deal. Attempted murder reduced to aggravated assault. 7 years in prison with no possibility of parole. No trial necessary. Justin set his phone down on the sleek countertop and stared at it for a long moment, his mind struggling to process the news. "How do you feel?" Michelle asked gently, her voice filled with concern. "I don't know," he admitted, looking up at her, his eyes filled with confusion. Part of me wanted to face her in court, to hear her explain it, to understand the twisted logic that drove her actions. But mostly I just want it to be over, to put this nightmare behind us. Michelle reached across the table, covering his hand with hers, her touch a source of comfort and strength. "It is over, sweetheart," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "She can't hurt us anymore." "Do you hate her?" Justin asked quietly, his gaze fixed on his mother's. "For what she did to you?" Michelle was quiet, considering her words carefully, her brow furrowed in thought. "No," she finally said, her voice filled with a profound sense of compassion. "I feel sad for her. Sad that she's so broken she thought violence was her only option. Sad that desperation twisted her into someone capable of that." She paused, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "But sadness isn't the same as allowing her back into our lives. Forgiveness doesn't mean staying in harm's way. It means freeing yourself from the weight of what someone else did to you." Justin absorbed that, letting the wisdom in her words settle over him like a balm, soothing the wounds that had been inflicted so deeply. "I hope she finds whatever she needs in there," Michelle added softly, her voice filled with genuine hope. "I hope she gets help, real help, not for our sake, but for hers." That was his mother, still extending grace even to the woman who tried to kill her, still believing in the possibility of redemption, still seeing the good in a world filled with so much darkness. Later that afternoon, they sat on the penthouse terrace, the city sprawling beneath them, a panoramic view of their domain. Michelle was wrapped in a soft blanket, her color finally returning, her strength coming back day by day, like a flower slowly unfurling its petals in the warmth of the sun. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Justin said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "That hard meeting, the one I was in when the hospital called." He shook his head, his voice filled with a sense of wonder. "I almost didn't answer, almost sent it to voicemail because I was in the middle of a presentation, caught up in the importance of the moment." Michelle turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "But something stopped me, something I can't explain. This feeling in my chest that said I had to pick up, had to go." His voice grew quiet, filled with a profound sense of humility. "If I'd ignored that call, if I'd stayed in that meeting 5 more minutes." "But you didn't," Michelle said softly, her voice filled with reassurance. "I know, but it wasn't logic that got me there, Mom. It wasn't planning or strategy. It was just this voice, this pull, this inexplicable sense of urgency." Michelle smiled softly, her eyes filled with a knowing wisdom. "Maybe that was God looking out for both of us, giving you the instinct you needed exactly when you needed it." Justin had never been particularly religious, had always been more inclined to trust logic and reason, to rely on his own intellect and ambition. Michelle had taken him to church as a kid, but as an adult, he drifted away, too busy building his life, his empire, to think about faith, to contemplate the existence of a higher power. But sitting there now, remembering that inexplicable urgency that had sent him running back to the hospital, he couldn't deny that it felt like something beyond himself, something divine. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion, unsure if he was talking to his mother or to someone else entirely. "For what?" she asked, her brow furrowed with curiosity. "For raising me to listen to that voice, for teaching me that love isn't something you earn. It's something you choose every single day." Michelle's eyes filled with tears, reflecting the depth of their connection, the unwavering bond that had sustained them through so much. "You've always known that, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice filled with love. "You just forgot for a little while." The weeks that followed were the most peaceful Justin had known in years, a sanctuary of love, laughter, and healing. His company thrived under distributed leadership, the team stepping up to the challenge and proving their capabilities. He joined board meetings from home, made decisions remotely, and found that the world kept turning without him being everywhere at once. He stopped measuring his worth by his bank account or his latest acquisition, the metrics of success which had always defined him. He started measuring it by mornings with his mother, by the sound of her laughter, by the way her hand felt in his during their evening walks, the simple joys that had always been there, waiting for him to notice. One night, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant shades of pink and gold, Michelle squeezed his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "You saved my life," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "You saved mine first," Justin replied, his eyes filled with love and admiration. "Every day for 45 years. She smiled, tears sliding down her cheeks. "That's what love does. It saves us over and over in ways we don't always see." Justin understood now what Audrey had never grasped, that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the intangible currency of human connection, in presence, in sacrifice, in showing up when it mattered, even when it cost you something. His mother had shown up for him his entire life, offering unconditional love and unwavering support, and now, finally, he was showing up for her, returning the favor in the only way that truly mattered. "I built an empire, Mom," Justin said softly, his voice filled with a newfound humility. "But you were always my foundation, and I almost lost you because I forgot that." "You didn't lose me?" Michelle whispered, her voice filled with warmth and love. "I'm right here." They sat together as the city lights began to flicker on below them, one by one, like promises being kept, a constellation of hope illuminating the darkness. And in that moment, Justin felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of peace that settled deep within his soul. Not because everything was perfect, because all of the scars and wounds were fully healed. It wasn't. He'd been betrayed. His trust had been shattered. He had a long journey of healing ahead of him, and more mistakes would definitely come. But he wasn't alone. And sometimes, that's enough to start rebuilding, to start again, to create a life filled with love, compassion, and gratitude. The following paragraph is not a part of the story, so I will not be rewriting this. If the story touched something in you, if it reminded you that healing is possible, that grace still finds people, that maybe you're not as alone as you thought, please share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Elevated Heart Stories. Tell me in the comments what lesson are you taking from Justin's journey, because maybe this story found you for a reason. In the golden light of that evening, mother and son sat together, knowing that even in the darkest moments, there's always a path forward. You just have to choose it, and choose the people who choose you back every single day.